Right, the self-timer. You've got to set it part way through its travel so that crescent shaped cutout faces the centre of the shutter, otherwise you won't be able to get the thing fitted down in place. That's fitted down there nicely now. Here is the spring. So I'll pull that through. It's going to go down under that lip of the lens tube. That's better, otherwise it won't fit. Let's get that spring hooked up to the post there. That's good. And at the other end I need to stretch that spring out and hook it over the post. That's it. I'm just running that down. We'll check its action in a second. So if we cock the shutter, set the self timer, it's running down. That's not sitting down correctly there, there's something a bit odd about that. Let's get that lever down in place. That's better. Now let's try that again. Shutter's cocked, self-timer set. No, it's still not sitting down correctly, that's something odd about that. I think my self-timer's not sitting in there correctly. It's to do with the that is really odd. It's to do with this lever here. It's not sitting correctly behind this lever here. Let's set that down to that position and try this again. That looks correct. Get my springs hooked back up again. I don't know why that's running down instantly there. I have to investigate. Well, I know what's causing that problem. Basically, when the shutter's cocked, instead of being held, the blade actuating ring being held back at this position, it relaxes slightly to this position. And at that position, it starts releasing the self-timer. And that is down to that catch that I identified as being bent when I was straightening up components down here, and I can now tell that it was bent for a good and sufficient purpose, because if it wasn't bent the shutter wouldn't work correctly. So I'm just going to have to do a little rejig of this lever down here to change the angle of it, and that lever's job of course is to hold the main cocking lever in the latched position, which is just slightly back from where it currently is. The alternative I've got is to bend this lever on the mechanism plate up slightly, but that really does look like it's pretty vertical, and it does strike the self-timer fairly low down, so I'd have to move that quite a way. I think my best course of action is to modify that lever that had previously been modified, and which had previously been modified for what appears to be a good reason. Oh well, live and learn. It's been a little bit of disassembly work here. That lever there needs to be bent out slightly so that it holds this lever a little bit further out than it currently does. I don't think I can conveniently do that with it in the body, so I'm going to remove it, adjust it and put it back. If I can just unhook the spring. Oh, it's much easier getting that spring in place when the mechanism plate was out of the body. Oh, I think a little bit of disassembly will be in order here so I can get this all done smoothly. So I'm going to take the mechanism plate out of the shutter case. Well, about 15 minutes later, after a little bit of work, this is what we've got. So there it was. That lever up at the top here that I'd identified as being bent, and in my wisdom decided I would straighten up, was bent for a reason. And of course I've had to go back in and bend it back into the somewhat less than satisfying shape that it was to start off with, so that we end up with a shutter that is all working. The self-timer works nicely, the shutter times correctly, and most importantly, you can cock the shutter, set the self-timer, and it sits there and waits for you to come along and press the shutter release, just as it should have done in the first place. So there you go. So I've just got to close this up now, which just means putting the speed cam ring back in place, the front ring and its retainer, and then putting the lenses back in. So I'll clean them up. Just apply a bit of molybdenum paste onto the surface of the main cam up here, the main ring, just so that where it latches into place, that action happens smoothly. Likewise, I will apply a little bit onto the end of this lever so that the retard gear train runs smoothly. And apart from that, that's it. I think I will put the speed control ring in place. So I'll wipe around the inside edge with some molybdenum paste. The speed setting cam, I'll run some molybdenum paste along there, and we'll pop this in position and see what sort of result we get. That should be B. Yes, that works correctly. If that's B, then that would be about 1 second. And somewhere around about there would be a tenth. That's good. Now, this front trim ring here has got 2 little notches in it that line up with this post and that post, which stop it from rotating. That's it. That's clicked down into position. And the retaining ring. Now, the retaining rings are thin. They're very easily damaged. So it's worth taking care, special care, not to get them cross-threaded or anything while you're trying to fit them in position. Oh, that screw's just picked up on that. I can see that's a bit loose. That'll probably be fine once it's turned into position. And I think we'll put it right there. And I'll back that ring off into that. Oh, that screw is very loose. I'm going to have to rivet that back in position, which means I'm going to take this off. I could just effectively glue that in position with a bit of lacquer, but I don't want to do that. I'll take this front ring off, front plate off, and I will use a stoking set to rivet over that tiny little rivet there. Yeah, it's just that rivet end is effectively, yeah, a little bit loose. I need to rivet that into position. So I've got to put that on the stoking set and just punch that rivet a little bit. Fortunately, I have such a stoking set. And a stoking set looks like this. It's a watchmaker's tool, and it's just the job for doing little tasks exactly like this. So I've got to find the appropriate punches and get this done. Right, that's been riveted back over. Check that that's all smooth in operation. The retaining ring doesn't sit down as well as I'd expect it to. That's better. Turn that to there, rotate that locking screw, and there's my shutter. It's looking good. Well, I'll just have to clean up the glass and put that back. The first thing I've got to do is remove all traces of that dirty, filthy, sticky grease from the inside of the central glass element. This is where the front group screws into place, and that is very sticky grease. That all has to come out. Once I've got rid of all traces of the grease, then I can clean the glass surface, but not before. You're wasting your time trying to clean the glass first, because you'll inevitably end up smearing it with some remnant of that grease, if there's any left in there. So the first thing to do is get rid of all traces of oil or grease. then you can think about cleaning the glass. It's looking good. So likewise I'll clean the mount at the rear, and you can see the dirt coming off there. That's oil and similar rubbish. Want all of that off. Now I can clean the glass. So I'll pop that to one side, and here I have the front. You can see that thick grease around there. All that's going to come off. This was very stiff to get off. Got to get that nice and clean, absolutely free from any oil or grease had before I clean that front lens element. This lens is a Ryoma, and that's a triplet. It's 3 pieces of glass. Triplets are usually regarded as being lesser in quality than more highly corrected lenses. But they're more common on simple cameras. So something the likes of a Retinette, and a lot of folding cameras would have had a triplet. Zeiss Icon, the Netar for example, the Netar range, they were a triplet. That's coming off fairly cleanly now. I'll check the front element and the centre element, see if one screws into the other easily. Oh look, that runs in very smoothly. There's absolutely no problem there. That's great. So I can clean the glass on those components and put them in the shutter body. Alright, so the central lens element can go in place. And if I can find the right pair of tweezers, I'll use them to screw it in, since there are 2 handy notches to engage. That's it. Our front group, I'll just apply a tiny amount of synthetic grease to the thread. This is a continuous thread, it's not a multi-start thread I think, so you could put the grease anywhere you like really. Make sure there's no dust in there. Screw that in. That's nice and smooth. That's fine, that's most of the way down, that's probably about where it needs to be. I need to look at this rear group I suppose. Or the rear element rather, because it's not a group. So likewise I will clean the body of it to remove any traces of oil and dirt. You can see there's a fair bit there too. And the same at the rear. And now clean the glass. And I'm just using normal domestic glass cleaner here, window cleaner, and that's perfectly adequate. You don't need deionized unicorn tears or anything else. This domestic glass cleaner usually does the job fine. I'm sure there are some domestic glass cleaners that would be terrible for the job, but generally speaking, come on camera, focus up. That's a bit better. But generally speaking, this is all you need, and I haven't seen any problems with it. Right, that's our lenses in place. The focus ring, of course, the scale ring, that'll go on once this is back on the camera and I'll get a chance to set the focus up. I better clean that focus scale ring because that's all dirty and greasy as anything. This camera's having a hard day, isn't it? This piece. What's its purpose? Well, its purpose is to limit the travel of your aperture setting lever here, and it serves really no other purpose apart from that and looking pretty. Now this camera came with quite a number of shims on the back of it. Now having too many shims, what that tends to happen is that if it builds up past the height of this screw here or even gets close to it, it means that the shutter's not held firmly. It can move in the mount. So I'm not going to put all of those shims back. I don't need them for my purposes because the focus adjustment will be made by adjusting the position of the front group. So that's good. I've got my shutter mounted on the camera there. And I have to drop in my retaining ring. Zoom out a bit. Out. That's better. And get it started. Of course I can't see down that hole. And I'm just using a long screwdriver here to gently run that retaining ring on, and I can tell you it's running down that thread very, very smoothly indeed. And check that the shutter's firmly located. Yes, it is. And I'll close the front of that camera because it's hard to get at the retaining ring otherwise. Just run that retaining ring round a bit further. Oh yeah, that's quite good. Now, did I use this to get it off? I think I did. That's good. Now I just tighten that up using a stiff pair of tweezers, and to tell the truth, I don't think I would really need to do much more than that. No, that's good. So our shutter and lens assembly is all in position, and we should check that the camera actually functions. So if we cock the shutter, I'll just roll the sprocket shaft across as though I was film had done that for me, and there you go. Press the shutter release, the shutter fires straight away. No hesitation, no problem. The film advances resetting at the same time. So that's all good. I need to check the focus with a ground glass screen, and the final task I'll need to do is get into the back of that camera, and where that black paint's been scraped off the back of that lens standard, I want to touch that up with some matte black paint. But first things first, I'll set the focus. With the focus correctly set at infinity, I notice here that there's a scribe mark across the front edge of that lens. Now I don't have the same number of spaces in there behind the shutter as it was set there previously, so that the distance would be different. But almost certainly that mark was put there by someone who'd just finished setting the focus on that lens before they put the focus scale ring in place, so they knew exactly where that lens was to go back to. Now I've got my focus scale ring, I've got my focus on the lens set to infinity. Where's my focus register pointers here? So I need to set my ring on here at the infinity mark. Against the stop for the infinity, which is right there. And if I do up my 3 screws, I did 2 of those screws up before I disturbed that focus scale ring. There we go. So the focus is nice and smooth, much better than it had been previously. And this camera is a good one again. I haven't ventured into doing anything with the film advance mechanism on it. It all appears to work quite well. The viewfinder is even reasonably clean, and as far as I'm concerned, the camera can go into my collection now in this state. It's quite a pretty example and has no obvious faults. I'll just clean my viewfinder lens. The viewfinder looks nice and clean inside. And there we have it. So, this camera was rejected by Kodak as being too old to repair in 1977. And here we are 42 years later, and it's finally been fixed. Thanks for watching. This little component here stops you from being able to set the shutter, set the self timer if the shutter is set to B, which of course would be a meaningless thing to do. On B, the shutter stays open only as long as your finger is on the button, and if your finger is not on the button, it obviously doesn't stay open. So that's in place. Let's get our front plate back on and the retaining ring. You'll notice I didn't need to remove the front group to get to remove the retaining ring on this particular camera. Quite commonly you do need to remove the front group. Difficult getting this retaining ring started. Yeah, that's started correctly now. Because it's so thin and light and comparatively flexible, it's easily damaged. Let's back that off 1 notch. No, that made absolutely no difference. Let's tighten it up 1 notch again. If it's too tight, it's too hard to change the settings. too stiff. There's no advantage in it being too stiff. That feels good. Screw my front element back in place again. And check my focus at infinity, which I know is going to be somewhere about there.